call Stuart Nash.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. There is one thing that we haven't discussed that was brought up at Select Committee and did take a little bit of time to work through and understand the consequences. And this is actually going back to part 24BA. This is offshore persons' bank accounts and tax file numbers. Now, whilst a little bit has been said about this, and this is where, and I'll quote Mr. Chair, 24BA1, the Commission must not allocate a tax file number in response to an offshore person's request unless the Commissioner first receives a current bank account for an offshore person. Now, where the Labor members had some concerns about this is that, as we know, we are a destination for a lot of young travellers. For people who come over here, they work in the orchards or they work during the tourist season and they disappear. And back in the day, when people were paid wages, obviously everyone had a bank account. That's how transactions were done. But what we saw as an unintended consequence of this, and this was also, I must admit, Mr. Chair, this was also brought up by a submission in the Chartered Accountants of Australia and New Zealand, was that if a young person or a traveller, let's not limit it to a young person, if a traveller was passing through and wanted to say, let's say an orchard job or a grape job, and in Hawke's Bay there are a lot of travelling seasonal workers. Of course they need an IRD number to get paid, but what they will require to get an IRD number is actually a bank account. And the unintended consequence that was actually raised by the Chartered Accountants of New Zealand and Australia and the Labor members was that this provides actually a level of compliance upon perhaps a certain group that shouldn't be there or is unnecessary. And so, for example, I want to go and work in an orchard, or a Chilean person. We have a number of these agreements with different countries. Wants to go and work in an orchard in Hawke's Bay. They need an IRD number in order to get paid. Well gone are the days where you get paid under the table in Hawke's Bay orchards. Don't know what it's like in the Wairarapa, but certainly in Hawke's Bay. They need an IRD number, but they also need a bank account. Now, to have a bank account, you need various forms of ID. I'm assuming that your passport will do, but normally, Mr. Chair, when you open a bank account, you need two forms of ID, and it's usually two forms of picture ID. And what's happened in recent times, Mr. Chair, is we have tightened up the law due to tax, as I mentioned earlier, due to tax avoidance provisions and concerns. It's in fact, it's under the Anti-Money Laundering and Counterfeiting Financing of Tourism Act 2009. It's quite a large piece of legislation, but what it has done is it's tightened up the means to achieve a bank account. And so what the Chartered Accounts of New Zealand and Australia said, and what we said, is we don't think that actually having a bank account in the first place should be a prerequisite for getting an IRD number, because it may provide a level of compliance that is unnecessary for a certain group of people who are coming in here. In fact, one that was actually used is oil rig workers. They come in here, they earn a substantial amount of money. This isn't my example, but it was certainly brought forward by, it might have even been the IRD, but it was certainly someone with much greater understanding of this than I. And they come in here, they are paid in New Zealand dollars because they're in the New Zealand tax jurisdiction. They sort of fly in, fly out. But their money is paid into an offshore bank account because that's the nominated bank account. That's the way apparently it works in the industry. But they will now need a New Zealand bank account. And again, it just provides a level of compliance that we think is unnecessary. And the reason I say that is especially because the Minister has stood up and said that they want to limit compliance and get rid of complexity, where we think that this is perhaps just opening up a level of compliance and complexity that doesn't necessarily need to be there. But as the Chair knows incredibly well, how the Select Committee process works is, well, the reason I think it's fantastic is we get a whole lot of experts in, and they put forward their views on how to better draft legislation that is workable in the real world. And Mr. Chair, in terms of part two, we had Ernst & Young. We had the Chartered Accountants of Australia and New Zealand. We had PricewaterhouseCoopers, put a couple of submissions in, four actually. We had the New Zealand Bankers Association. We had ANZ, all talking about and Chapman Tripp actually, all querying the need to actually get a bank account number before you get an IRD number. And the concerns range from the time it actually took,
Jamie Lee Ross.
The question.
The question is that the question be now put. Those of that